like to welcome everybody here to our little gathering that we've been having with the city, county, and school officials. This thing started back in December when the assessor and the treasurer, auditor, myself, we gathered some information together on what would happen, the effects of the Vistion closure. We had a meeting amongst the assessors and some county officials, and from that meeting we decided that we needed to share all this information that we had received with the various taxing entities. So we got a group together and we've been meeting basically once a month, every month, to try to go over try to decide what's going to happen with the new laws, guess kind of what was going to happen. Then once the House bills were enacted, kind of respond to that. I know each of us in their own entities, I know Leonard has been going to a lot of meetings with the city association. We just had 6 county council members attend the Association of Indiana Council workshop. So we've really been trying to get a handle on what's happening here. But it's been a great time to meet with all of our different taxing units to really have a lot of communication between each other. So once again, this is Larry DeBoer, Department of Agricultural Economics from Purdue University. We've been in contact with Mr. DeBoer throughout, and he's brought us some analysis on the possibilities of what will happen with the closure of Vistion. At this point, I'll just turn it over to Mr. DeBoer.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm pleased to be with you here today. Don't have a fancy PowerPoint presentation to give you, but I did bring the Excel model that I used to do all this stuff. So if there are questions and pieces of analysis that I haven't done, it's possible. You can just feed it right into the model and see what happens. So that's what's up there behind me. But mostly I'll be referring to the report that I wrote here, Projections of Assessments, Levies, Tax Rates from Fayette County Governments, 2008-2010. Now what you've got here, what I just brought here is a little bit different from the one that was circulated a few weeks ago. And a couple of things have changed. I continue to learn about House Enrolled Act 1001. And as you know, many people are out there trying to figure out all of the implications of this thing, and I figured out a couple more implications, and that made a little bit of difference in the model. I discovered an error on my part. It turned out to be a bank error in your favor, actually, in 2010. So things will look dire, but not quite so dire as they did on the first one. It doesn't change very much at all for 2009, and I'll show you where the differences are. In a sense, you're way ahead of the game here, having been meeting among local governments since December. Every county is going to have to do that now. Most counties are not facing anything as difficult as the loss of the Vistion assessed value, but the budgeting process now is going to require meetings among local government officials. It's an added difficulty, I guess, that Fayette has to face the implications of Vistion in 2009. But every county is facing the implications of 1001, the property tax reform. And 1001 implies, for counties like Fayette County, that no one unit can make its budget until it knows the tax rates of every other unit. And that means that the city can't know how much revenue it's going to collect until the school sets its tax rate, and the school can't know how much revenue it's going to get from the property tax until the county sets its tax rate, and the county can't know until the city sets its tax rate. And we've been kind of looking around at each other at these meetings and saying, well, how are we going to do that? That's never been true before. Always every unit was able to do its budget, set its tax levy, collect its revenue on its own. That is no longer the case, and the reason is the new circuit breaker limits. Now, the circuit breaker limits, maybe I just ought to start by reviewing what that is and why it matters, because we'll be talking a lot about that. The circuit breaker limits, it turns out, rather strongly what would you say, inhibit the flexibility you've got to respond to what's going to happen with the loss of the assessed value in 2009. Well, circuit breaker, very simple idea. I think the simple ideas have the most complicated consequences, and that's certainly true here. With the circuit breaker in 2009, no homeowner will have to pay more than 1.5% of their gross assessed value in property taxes, which means that if your house is worth $100,000, pick a number, your tax bill can't be higher than $1,500. In 2010, that number, that percentage drops to 1%, which means if your house is assessed at $100,000, it's before deductions and credits and all that. If your house is assessed at $100,000, you can't pay more than $1,000 in property taxes. For farmland and other residential property and retirement homes, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, the limit will be 2.5% in 2009 and 2% in 2010. And for all other real property and all personal property, the limit will be 3.5% in 2009 and 3% in 2010. Now, why does that create complications? It's such a simple idea. The reason is because the tax rate that matters is the tax rate that shows up on the taxpayer's bill. So you're taking your assessed value, you're subtracting deductions, you're multiplying it by the tax rate, you're subtracting credits, and that is the tax bill that homeowners pay, and that is the tax bill that gets compared to that circuit breaker limit based on the initial assessed value. If that tax rate puts the tax bill above the circuit breaker limit, then the taxpayer gets a credit. That credit will not be funded by the state. And this is the first time that the state has ever allowed local taxpayers to take a credit, to take a percentage reduction off their tax bills without the state saying, yes, and we will replace the money. The old property tax replacement credits, the homestead credits that we've always known now for 35 years, the state replaced that money out of their budget. With the circuit breaker credits, the state is not going to replace that money, which means that if the taxpayer takes a circuit breaker credit, if they get a circuit breaker credit, that will be part of the levy that you don't get to collect. Means the local governments take the hit on circuit breaker losses. If there are circuit breaker credits, you raise less than the levy that you've actually budgeted. Well, if you think about it, though, you got the taxpayer, you got the tax bill, they have a circuit breaker credit, but that tax rate that produced that circuit breaker credit, that tax rate that was high enough to give the taxpayer a circuit breaker credit, is the sum of the tax rates from the county and the township and the city and the school corporation, and the library district, and any other special district. So it's the sum of all those. So the question is, if the taxpayer isn't paying this amount, this circuit breaker credit, who takes the loss? And what happens is you take that circuit breaker credit and you divvy it up among all the local units based on their shares in the total tax rate. So if the county's tax rate is 1/3 of the total, the county takes 1/3 of the loss. Well, that means that each individual unit can't know how much in circuit breaker credits they're going to lose until they know what is the total tax rate that their taxpayers are going to have to pay. Since the county and the school corporation overlap one another throughout the whole county, and then the city overlaps a large part of the county and the school corporation, and of course the townships and the library district overlap as well, for the city to know how much their circuit breaker credit losses are going to be, they have to know what is the total tax rate of their taxpayers, and they can only know that if they know the county's tax rate and the school's tax rate and the township's tax rate. City can't budget, can't know how much revenue they're going to collect until all of the other units budget. Now, what are we going to do about that? Well, what they're going to have to do about that, what every county's going to have to do about that, is get together and let each other know what's going on. What they're also going to have to do, and here's what I've been telling county folks, and I pick on the county auditor, actually, for this, because that's where the data lies. But, and some of the auditors have given me that deer in the headlights look when I say this. But, but here's what, at least at some point, here's what has to happen. The 1001 says that the civil governments, 15 or more days before budgets are adopted, must turn their proposed levies, budgets, and tax rates into the county council. And the county council is supposed to analyze them, look at them, review them, and then make a non-binding recommendation. Well, this is a kind of oversight, tax relief kind of idea, but it's a non-binding recommendation. It doesn't, frankly, the non-binding recommendation part of it doesn't interest me very much. What it does interest me is that this provides the legal authority, at least for the county council and the civil governments, to gather the information required to make an estimate of what the circuit breaker credits will be in advance. So a little bit more than 2 weeks before budgets are adopted, everybody except the school corporation has to turn in their information to the county council, and that's the information that's needed to project the circuit breaker credits. Now, I was at a school business managers meeting a week ago, I guess it was, and I urged them to participate in this process, even though they're not legally required to do so. The schools need to know how much they're going to lose as well. All the other units need the school information in order to do the analysis. We hope the schools will. You're going to participate in this, aren't you? I thought so. I thought so. So there you go. You know, places where there are 9 or 10 school corporations may have a little trouble gathering it all together, but that's so it's a good idea. Everybody benefits from that. Well, okay, the problem is you gather all this information, then what do you have to do? Then you have to somehow estimate what the circuit breaker credits are going to do. Try as I might, and I've been working on this for a long time with your data and in other circumstances, I cannot find an aggregate way to get that done. The only way I can figure out how to get that done is to essentially do a simulated tax billing, where you take the proposed tax rates and run them through all of the individual parcel assessed values of everybody in the county. That's almost 19,000 parcels if my spreadsheet is right. And that is a major piece of number crunching. And from what the auditors and treasurers out there tell me, some counties are set up to do that. Some counties' tax billing software will allow them to do simulations. Some of them have parallel analysis systems. Some of them have consultants, but some of them say, we wouldn't dare mess with our tax billing software in that way for fear of producing bogus tax bills out of the end of the process. And so the question is, will the auditors or will the consultants or will somebody have the wherewithal to actually do this analysis? Well, I did the analysis, essentially. What I've done here is the analysis that needs to be done by the other 91 counties, so you can take mine and use that if you like. And you have to take a look at the assumptions and make sure that I've got everything that ought to be in there. And that, I guess, having done this for Fayette County and having done it on the statewide level, I guess that makes me, at least temporarily, the expert on how this is done. By the end of the year, when all the other counties have been struggling with it, they'll all be the experts and I'll have to learn from them. But at the moment, I'm the one who knows, and it's partly thanks to you, and one of the reasons that I did this for free was because you were willing to give me the data and I could practice on it and figure out what needs to be done and make mistakes and correct them and figure out all this stuff. So that's the deal here that we've got. Every county is facing this problem. You are facing this problem with the added attraction of a loss of 12% of your assessed value in a single year. So let's take a look at what I've got here, and you know, we're all we got most of Fayette County government here, I think. So stop me anytime with questions if you do have questions. This should be more like a seminar than a lecture. But let's take a look here. I did correct a numerical error. The error I had made was to not adjust the circuit breaker limits for increases in assessed value that I was assuming. That didn't make much difference in '09. It made something of a difference, a few $100,000 difference in 2010. Since I was continuing to use the data and refine the model, I discovered and stumbled on that thing. So the numbers in the data table are going to be a little bit different from the ones that you saw before. I didn't have to change the text hardly at all. The situation is still the same. The numbers are just a little bit different. So what happens? Well, summary here. Visteon is already gone. 2009, that's going to affect budgets. From the measurements I was able to take out of your data, that's about 12% of your assessed value, about $3.6 million in tax payments that Visteon makes, 18% of your tax levy altogether. That is an enormous hit for a county to take all at once. I think anyone would agree with that. What's likely to happen? Well, In the old days, meaning up until now, but not in the future, in the old days, you basically had a choice. You could say, and at the extremes, here was the choice. You could say, we are legally allowed to raise a particular maximum levy. We are going to continue to raise that maximum levy. Yes, assessed values have fallen. The rates will rise in order to give us that maximum levy. Now, some of them are rate controlled, but mostly it's levy controlled. Mostly you have a maximum levy. So the rates would go up. Yes, that would be a huge hit, distributing $3.6 million in taxes over the remaining taxpayers. They would end up seeing this increase in tax rates, but we keep our budgets whole. You could have done that in the old days. Or you could have said, we're going to keep our tax rates constant. We're going to allow the decline in assessed value at the fixed tax rates to reduce our budgets, all of our budgets, and we will then deal with it. So it's a choice at the extremes between making your remaining taxpayers foot the entire bill of the lost assessed value or taking the entire budget hit among all the local governments through lost revenue. With 1001, you no longer have that first choice. You no longer have the choice of collecting the full levy on a smaller tax base with higher tax rates. Yes, you can allow your tax rates to rise, and that's in fact what I assumed in the analysis here, but the circuit breaker limits restrict the amount that the taxpayers have to pay. And in fact, of the $3.6 million that Visteon would pay, you're going to have to take at least $2.4 million in lost revenue. So 2/3 of that $3.6 million is going to have to be taken as lost revenue. You don't have a choice with that under 1001. Let's see what else to say about this as a way of introduction. Fayette County was already going to be one of the counties that took hits on circuit breaker losses anyway. Not so much in 2009, but in 2010, the Legislative Services Agency had your losses at about $500,000. When I run the model without the Visteon loss, which is what Legislative Services Agency assumed, because they didn't know what was happening here, they just trended your assessed value upward, I got a loss of $893,000, but you don't have to make too many adjustments to the assumptions to get it right where LSA was. So we pretty much agree with what the Legislative Services Agency was saying would be the total loss in circuit breaker credits for Fayette County prior to the Visteon loss. Now, why does Visteon matter? Decline in assessed value, higher tax rates. Higher tax rates are the recipe for greater circuit breaker losses. When tax rates are higher, more taxpayers are eligible for the circuit breaker and more taxpayers are eligible for more circuit breakers. That's taxes that they don't pay. That's lost revenue by the local government. So the higher our tax rates, the greater are the losses going to be. Let's actually go through the detailed results. Why don't we do that, and then I can explain how I did this. And we'll do it, I think, by looking at the tables. And you can read the text at your leisure. Like I say, it hasn't really changed very much from what you had before. Page 6 has got table 1, and we'll go through it year by year. How about that? 2008, then 2009, then 2010. So on page 6, what I've got are the projections of assessed value, and I did it by unit here. And the way you do this is you take the tax base, that's 19,000, almost 19,000 parcels, and you make assumptions about what's going to happen to the assessed value. The assumption I made was a 2% increase year after year after year. Is that right? I have no idea. And the reason that I have no idea is, number one, you know a heck of a lot more about Fayette County than I do. But number two, we have very little idea after all of the chaos of the last decade in property taxes. We have very little idea as to what normal increases in assessed value are. We moved to market value, so we don't know, and we did that as of taxes payable in 2003, so we've only been a market value state for 5 years. And then we went to trending, and we've done trending for a couple of years, and so we really don't have any long-term idea as to what is going on. I used 2%, but I also tried 1%, I tried 3%, I tried 0, I tried 4%. It makes a little bit of a difference in terms of circuit breaker losses, maybe a couple $100,000 one way or the other, but you're always in the ballpark. So the assumption doesn't seem to matter that much. But I did make an assumption of 2%, and that was for everything except farmland. I don't know, have the tax bills gone out in Fayette yet? No, okay. So I'm still, talking about 2008 here. Ordinarily, we'd already know exactly what was happening in 2008, but as with every county, tax bills didn't go out on time. With farmland, you may know the base rate of farmland for taxes payable this year has gone up from $880 to $1,140. That's a 29.5% increase in the base rate of farmland. If you take a look at it by unit there, the percent changes by unit for 2008, you'll see that there are 4 places where there are double-digit increases, and those, I'm guessing, are the rural townships, the most rural townships where farmland is most important. Fairview, Orange, Posey, Waterloo. That's where farmland dominates assessed value, and so a 29.5% increase in the dominant part of your assessed value will cause a big increase in the assessed value for those units. Take a look at a place like Connorsville, which I assume doesn't have much farmland, and that's basically just the 2% increase in gross assessed value less the change or the deductions gives you the 2.4. So 5.2% increase in total, higher than the 2% because of the increase in farmland. So that's the assumption for assessed value for 2008. Turn the page on to page 7 and look at the top box there. And what I assumed for the property tax levy was a 4% increase. And one could have gone into a lot of detail, and certainly you know more than I ever could about what are the trends in each of the different funds and so forth. Had I been taking a whole lot of care, I might have treated the debt service funds different from the other funds and so forth. But I chose 4%. That's basically what's been happening to the statewide maximum levy over the last several years. So we do 4%. Once again, you could vary this thing up and down to see how much difference it makes, and it does make a difference, but not so much that it changes the story. But as you can see, there are a 4% increase. Circuit breaker credits, we actually do have a circuit breaker limit this year. The limit is 2% on homesteads, but I didn't find any homesteads at all in Fayette County that would be eligible for that limit. So no circuit breaker losses this year. So the levy less credits is the same as the property tax levy. You see the dollar change there with a 4% increase, about 1.1 million, and that's what's happening to the levy on those assumptions. Turn the page, you can see what's happening to tax rates under those assumptions. You've got 2007 and 2008 at the beginning of Table 3 there. And you can see most of the units have declines in their tax rates. And the reason for that is that those are the rural units where assessed value because of the farmland increase is going up a whole lot, whereas the levy is only going up 4%. And since the tax rate is the levy divided by assessed value, if the assessed value goes up more than the levy, the tax rates come down. So the tax rates come down. They don't come down in Connorsville and Glenwood. That's places that don't have the farmland, and so the 4% increase in the levy exceeds the 2% increase in assessed value, and you get an increase in the tax rate. But overall, a decline in the tax rate. What's likely to happen? Now, here's the interesting part of this story. The rest of it's sort of just assumptions, result of assumptions. Table 4 actually reflects the first indication that something unusual is going on because of what the legislature did with 1001 in March. And you'll notice that number there. This is the baseline tax bill changes by property type. Homesteads there, a 69% decline in tax bills by homesteads. Tax bills for homesteads in 2007, a little bit more than $6.5 million. Under the number crunching I did there, it drops to about $2 million, a 69% decline. Your homeowners are likely to be extremely happy with their tax bills when they go out. Now, why is that happening? There's two things there. One is you adopted that local option income tax last year and distributed the tax relief to homeowners and owners of rental housing. That's small and large units, commercial apartments and smaller residential rentals. And so that's going to reduce property taxes, shifting it to income taxes. But the second thing is that the legislature said we're going to do all this spectacular stuff in 2009, takeovers of levies, new deductions, circuit breaker limits, all of that stuff, but we want to deliver property tax relief now. And they figured, well, we can't very well take over all those levies in 2008 because we're already in 2008 and it's too late to do that for this budget year. So they decided to hand out property tax relief to homeowners with the traditional method of increasing homestead credits. And they took the money that they're going to get this year from that increase in the sales tax that started on April 1st, and they took $620 million statewide, divvied it up among all of the counties, and you guys, when it was up there, you guys got about a little more than $3 million, I think, of the April 29th memo. Said a little more than $3 million that you got, and that number is up there. Just to hit OK, and because I don't need a password for that actually. Well, no, there it is. There it is. There it is. $3 million. $3,026,915. This is the what I call the policy page of the spreadsheet, so you can feed in your policy changes and the calculations will take place in the rest of it. But there it is, $3,026,000. Now that's not even all of it. There's an additional statewide $250 million that was budgeted by the state last year, and that revenue is coming from the racinos, which are those two racetracks that are now been turned into casinos because they've got a couple of thousand slot machines apiece. And for the privilege of doing that, they had to each pay they each had to pay $250 million, and we're going to allocate $250 million. So that's $870 million in additional homestead property tax relief that the state is allocating to the counties this year, and that will reduce homeowner property taxes by about a third statewide. You add in your Lloyd, and your homeowners see a terrific drop in their tax bills in 2008. You'll notice the other folks who are getting tax cuts are non-homestead residential and apartments. That's the rental housing that comes from the local option income tax from the Lloyd. They are eligible for that tax relief as well. One thing that I wasn't able to do with the data was to split out the part of non-homestead residential that's rentals and the part of non-homestead residential that isn't rentals, and so I just gave it all to non-homestead residential. So there's a little bit of an anomaly in there, but in the aggregate it still works pretty well, I think. If you look down the line there, you see the only folks who are getting substantial increases in property taxes is agriculture, and that's because of the big increase in the assessed value of farmland. Increase from $880 to $1140, 29.5%, raises the agricultural property taxes. Yes, sir. Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, I know it's like a freight train, isn't it? You just got to derail it.
A couple things. Could you explain how farm ground is assessed at 1,100?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because we've had, when we did the Lloyd last time, you know, the position of county council that we give it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The city council made that decision.
Right.
In our county. I think it's going to be able to be renewed, and I would, I'm a farmer, so from our perspective, I mean, everyone sees farm ground selling at $5,000 or $4,000 an acre and says, well, you know, you're getting a big break anyway. But that's not the way that it's assessed. There's a formula as far as.
Right.
So if you could.
Yeah, the farmland is assessed this way. You take a statewide base rate, and that's the $880 and then the $1140, and you adjust it for the productivity of the farmland, which is basically a soil survey, and they assign different factors to each different kind of soil. And the Purdue Agronomy Department actually figured those out about 30 years ago now. It's probably about time for an update on that stuff. But at any rate, then you multiply. So you take the base rate, you multiply by that factor, and the factor ranges, I think, from about 0.5 to about 1.2, if I remember. And then there are also things called influence factors, which is if the ground floods frequently, you can subtract a percentage. If it's covered with obstacles, with the forest, say, you can subtract a percentage, and that becomes the assessed value of farmland. Now, the key thing is, what about the base rate? Where does that come from? And that is now a part of trending. They change it now every year. They change it based on a formula, and it's what's called a capitalization formula. What they do is take the net income, an estimate of the net income that a typical acre of farmland could earn, and they put that in the numerator, and then in the denominator they put an interest rate. And what the result is when you make that division is how much would a reasonable person invest in an income of so much from this acre of farmland to get this particular return from the investment. Well, it's just a straight capitalization thing. What goes into the numerator are things like commodity prices and costs and farmland rents. They all go into the numerator of the thing, so they calculate what's happening there. And then they take a 6-year average. And the ironic thing about this is that the 6-year average right now for taxes right now, if I'm remembering right, is from 1999 to 2005 data, I think it is. And so there's a huge lag. The numbers from 1999 are still influencing the assessed value of farmland right now. What that also means, though, is that we can project forward because we already have the data for 2006 and 2007. So we know that the base rate for farmland next year is going to be $1,200 rather than $1,140. The Department of Local Government Finance has already announced that. I ran the calculations on the existing data, and it's likely to go up to about $1,250 for taxes payable in 2010, and about $1,350 to $1,400, somewhere in there, for taxes payable in 2011. So farmland, base rate of farmland, continue to rise. Reason it's going up is partly the increase in commodity prices, partly the fact that interest rates in 2005 were lower than they were in 1998, and 1998 was the year it was dropped when 2005 was added. So it's this kind of rolling average. At any rate, base rate of farmland is likely to go up. That's called use value assessment. And the idea there is that we're going to assess farmland based on its use in agriculture, not based on what it actually sells for if it were going to be converted to some other use. And it is, when you take a look at it from that point of view, it is a terrific tax break for farmers. If you actually tried to tax farmers on the actual market value of their land, their taxes would be triple what they are now. So you can say that, but on the other hand, you can also say farmland taxes took a pretty big hit this year compared to what they were, and they're likely to continue to increase, and you'll see that on the estimates here, likely to continue to increase faster than most other property taxes in the foreseeable future, as long as commodity prices continue to stay up. So that's what's going on with farmland, and it's the only major piece of assessed value that is assessed in a non-market value way. Yeah, sure. Yes, well, by 2010 it will be, that's right.
We've got to calculate and be careful that we don't waste our load to when the circuit breaker may get on us.
I've got an analysis of that, so I'll be able to tell you about that.
And we need to know that when we talk about spread.
Yeah, I will be able to tell you about that. I've actually ran that simulation. That was, in fact, I'm doing a talk on Thursday, a statewide broadcast about circuit breakers and budgeting, and I'm going to be using your data as an example as to how do you do this analysis and how much difference it makes, because it makes a huge difference in circuit breaker losses, the way you allocate the LOIT, and I'll show you that here in a bit. Yeah?
If you look at Table 4,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to decide to spread that extra homestead credit we're getting
Mm-hmm.
this year out into 09 and 010,
Right.
what would you just do, a third of it, and then that would what would it be, 10, 12% difference?
Yeah, actually, if you want to cut the chase there, I did it on page 12. I did it just to see, and the best I could come up with in terms of smoothing your the homeowner changes was to do 30% in 08, 40% in 09, and 30% in 10.
And do we have that option of selecting per
Well,
you've been in?
I don't know. Here's the thing. The legislature, in its wisdom, and I do not know why they did this, put a 20-day limit on that option. They said 20 days after you receive notice as to how much revenue you're going to receive, you can petition. After 20 days, then the deadline is passed and you can't do it anymore. Well, the memo came out on April 29th, which means the deadline passed somewhere in the third week of May. Nobody was up on that by then, right? The deadline passed without anybody even knowing they could do it, let alone actually doing the analysis. DLGF knows that that's what happened. They may look for a way to get around that part of the law and say, we'll open it up. Maybe they'll figure out a way to set a new starting date or something like that. So watch for memos and that sort of thing. There really aren't very many. Only the counties that adopted LOIT last year are able to do it, and only the counties that have a jump in homeowner taxes in 2009 would really be advised to do that. Fayette and maybe 2 or 3 others are the only ones. But you, more than anybody, could benefit from doing that. Now, I say that, though, and you as elected officials have to decide whether it's better to get the jump done all at once or whether to spread it out over 3 years. And I'll tell you why here in a minute, but the big jump comes in 2008 with a 120% increase in homeowner taxes. If you spread it out, I think you can get it to be about 15% in 3 straight years. Which is better, 110 or 3 straight 15s? That's, that's political science, not economics. Right? I'm sorry?
That option is still open?
Well, that option, is, at the moment, it's not open for you, and it's up to the DLGF. I've spoken to them, and they're kind of, they don't know whether they're going to open it up, or, well, they don't know a lot. I mean, they're struggling as much as anyone else is with this stuff, and that, since it's only 14 counties, it's not their first priority, but it's conceivable they'll open it up again. So the only thing you can do is watch for the memo or call them up once in a while. It's the county council and the auditor, I think, that petition the DLGF to do it. So it's a county decision. Yeah, you might do that. I don't think it could hurt to try that. And, they'd send you a memo back saying the deadline has passed, but at least they know that if they decide to open it up, they got to let you know. So couldn't hurt, I wouldn't think. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, they know that. The trouble is, it's in the statute. Yeah. So, but one could, there's all kinds of tricks you can do. And as we learned last year, the governor can just change things and then get the legislature to approve them in November. And so who knows whether that can be done or not. Is there another question?
I was going to tell you your battery was low on the.
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, we did. Oh, good. Thanks very much. Did it? Well, it's like I say, it's a 240 meg spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, which is not the biggest one I've ever used, but it's big. And you start loading up 19,000 lines in a spreadsheet, then it gets real big real fast. So, okay, that's 2008 for you. What about 2009? That's when everything happens. That's when most everything happens. So what happens? Well, if you look at Table 1, you can see almost a 24.8% decline in total assessed value, $222 million loss out of the original 898 in pay 2008. And that's coming from, or what's influencing assessed value is 4 things. 2 of them increases, 2 of them decreases. One is you got the farmland increase going up from 1140 to 1200, so that's a 5.3% increase. And so that's influencing mainly the rural areas. I assume 2% for everything else. For all other non-farm, real, and personal property, you got the 2% assumption in there. But then there's 2 things that are reducing assessed value. One is the loss of Vistion, and that's mostly a personal property problem. It's not so much the buildings, which are still there, and you're still assessing some of them, if I'm getting that right. It's almost $100 million in personal property, business equipment, that I guess has been actually yanked out of the building and is no longer there to assess. So that's the big hit. So about almost 100 million of that 222 is Vistion, but that leaves the bulk of it. Where is that coming from? That's something that's happening in every county this year, and that's the result of a new way to deliver property tax relief to homeowners, and that is a great big new deduction for homeowners. And what we're going to do is take the assessed value of homes, that would be the market value, the initial assessed value that the assessor puts on the property. You subtract off the $45,000 standard deduction, and that's already exists right now, and it's going to continue on at $45,000. And then out of that remainder, you cut off another 35%. So you take 35% of that remainder. Now, it's technically true that if the remainder is above $600,000, so if there's a house worth $645,000 or more, that you only take off 35 on the first $600,000 and then 25% of the rest. There aren't any houses like that in Fayette County, so you don't have to worry about that. 35% will do. So you subtract that 35%. Statewide, that's 15% of statewide assessed value that's just going to disappear because of that new deduction. And that's about 120 million. 120 million out of the 900,000, that's about the same here. About 15% of your total assessed value going to disappear because of this increase in homestead assessed value. And that's the primary way that property tax relief is going to be delivered out of 1001 after 2008. In 2008, it's a great big new credit. In 2009 and after, it's a great big new deduction. Well, so what do we got? A 25% almost decrease in assessed value in 2009 when you run all those numbers that way. What happens to the levy? Well, that's the second square there on page 7. Property tax levy down to 20.7 million. Now, as part of property tax relief, the state is eliminating the old property tax replacement credits and the homestead credits. Property tax replacement credits we've had since the Bowen administration in 1973. Homestead credits we've had since 1980. Those traditional programs that take up about $2.1 billion in the state budget are going to disappear. The state's going to use that money and the added sales tax money to instead take over particular functions of local government and pay for them with state money rather than with property taxes. The idea here, I think, is that the thought has always been that if you give across-the-board relief, which is what the property tax replacement credits were, all of the tax levies for all of the functions are still there, and you can cut them down, but they grow back, say the legislators. But if you actually eliminate particular levies, like the school general fund, then it can't grow back because it doesn't exist anymore. And that was the idea of a different way to deliver more permanent property tax relief. We'll see. We'll see if that actually works. But that's it. So if you take a look at the percent changes on the property tax levy in 2009, you see the state unit down 100%. The state has always had a little piece, tiny little piece of the property tax, raising $8 or $10 million statewide. They're going to give that up. The legislature wants to do that, even though it doesn't really deliver any property tax relief to speak of. But they want to do that so they can speak of the property tax as a purely local tax. They won't have to say, and there's a little bit in the state, and then the citizens say, well, the state is doing the property tax. They don't want to have to deal with that anymore. So that's what's going on there. So that state unit levy disappears. Fayette County down 25%. That's the elimination of the welfare levies. The welfare levies are going to disappear and be taken over by the state. I think a lot of people would look at that and say, well, for years we've had a state-run program, an entitlement program that the state would administer and then hand the counties the bill. Now the state's going to pay for it. So that welfare levy is going to disappear, and that will deliver property tax relief. You can see we've got a negative number for Connorsville Civil City. The state is taking over the pre-1977 police and fire pension payments, and Connorsville's got a couple of line items for property taxes on that. So we eliminated those, and that's a 2.1% decline. But then the big one, as you can see, Fayette County School Corporation levy cut almost in half. The state is taking over the school general fund levy, and that is by far the biggest piece of property tax relief that is been passed in 1001. You can see how much difference it makes. A school levy down from over 13 million in 2007 to under 7 million in 2008 and under 7 million in 2009. So that's a huge reduction in the levy. So property tax levies decline. All the other levies, I assumed, would increase by 4%. The other thing that 1001 does is create the circuit, or is really put on some circuit breaker limits starting in 2009. They're not the full permanent limits. It's a kind of phase-in. 1.5% on homesteads, 2.5% on farmland, nursing homes, and other residential property, which include commercial apartments, by the way, and 3.5% on everything else. And the circuit breaker credits start to bite in 2009 for Fayette County. I get a little bit less than $1.5 million. Now remember what this number is. This is the sum of all the circuit breaker credits that your taxpayers are taking, because the tax rate produces a tax bill that exceeds whatever the percentage is of their gross assessed value, of the assessed value that starts out on their tax bills. And so what you do then is add that up by taxing district, and then divvy that up by shares in the tax rate, and add that up then all of the, for all the taxing districts added up by unit. And what you see are the circuit breaker credits for each unit there. Connersville City ends up with about 60% of that total at $826,000 of the $1,478,000.
You pulled the general fund for the school corporation out. Did you figure a 4% growth in the other levies that are still in there?
Yes. Yes, I did. Yeah, 4% increase on all the levies that remain is what it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Credits. Are these the exact numbers that's coming off each individual entity, or would the 1.4 be different numbers? See what I mean, is the 826 or the?
Well, that should sum up to the 1.4.
Right.
Yeah.
That'd be coming off, that's the numbers that would come off of each of our budgets.
Yes, that is
We've
correct.
already budgeted.
Right. For for 2009, you know, what you'll do is you'll set your property tax levy the way you always do, but you won't receive the full levy. You'll receive some fraction of that levy, some reduction of that levy because of the circuit breaker credits.
That's what I'm saying, that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. We
Yeah.
have already set our budgets. We will get the information back that we have to cut X amount of
Right.
dollars from the budgets that we've made.
Right, right. Now, this is when you say get the information back. How is that going to happen is the question. You know, I can imagine two things. One is if counties can get it together and do the analysis in advance and know coming into the fiscal year or into the calendar year what their budgets are likely to be. So that would, I think that's what we ought to be aiming for across the state, is to have every county, or at least a whole bunch of consultants, develop the ability to do that kind of analysis based on the proposed tax rates that come in. The other alternative, though, is to realize that to some degree you're just not going to collect your whole levy. You may not know going into the budget year how much less you're going to collect, and you just have to be conservative. Now, after the first couple of years, you'll start to see some patterns, and only big disruptive things like Vistion would change it substantially. But certainly this first year and the first couple of years, because we got a change in the amount or the limits on circuit breakers in 2010, the first couple of years we're going to go into this thing not knowing what the losses are going to be, unless you do an analysis like this.
So then basically for budgets that we'd be talking about 2009 budget year,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to all be going in doing budgets for that. We should assume that in our Fayette County Council that 300,000 of our budget will not be, or 269.
269, right.
Will not be collected.
Yes, that's what that
So
means.
if we have to basically cut, let's say we have to cut 400,000 to get to our number,
Mm-hmm.
really, we should cut 700
Yep.
to have a little leeway there.
That's right. That's right.
But aren't you kind of fooling yourself? I think Art looked at it, and I feel like we should budget, assuming we were going to make up the difference in the tax rate, knowing we're not going to, and budget for the maximum. And then sit back and use your analysis
Yeah.
to say, we're going to be about $826,000 short, so we have a spending plan here.
Mm-hmm.
But if we start budgeting and taking that out,
Well, yeah,
we're going to be in trouble.
I would agree. It would be a bad idea for a couple of reasons to budget low and bring your tax rate lower, budget less than your maximum levy. There's actually an advantage to the circuit breaker thing if you look at it from kind of a crazy angle. Suppose you had decided, suppose we didn't have 1001 and Vistion was leaving, and you decided not to charge $3.6 million to all your existing taxpayers because of how much screaming there would be if you tried to do that. And so you decided, well, we'd better keep our levy down below our maximum levy in order to do that. The trouble with keeping your levy below your maximum levy in any one year is that reduces your maximum levy in the future. So if you don't collect it now, you can never collect it ever. Well, in this case, you can keep your levy up at the maximum, but give the taxpayers get this tax break anyway because of the circuit breaker credits. If assessed value ever recovers, could, right? So maybe you find somebody who'll come back in and occupy that factory. If assessed value ever recovers, then you've still got your maximum levy. You haven't reduced it. So in a sense, I would agree absolutely that probably every unit wants to be absolutely at its maximum levy. Second reason why that is because if you think about a taxpayer that's at or a taxpayer that is at his or her circuit breaker limit, that's a kind of fixed pie that they're going to pay. No matter what happens to tax rates, that's what they're going to pay, that limit. So if you reduce your tax rates, you lose a piece of that pie and everybody gets more. And so everybody, in a sense, has an incentive to be right at their maximum levies. And it's kind of a perverse result of a tax relief bill here, is that we've given everybody an incentive to maximize their slice of the circuit breaker limit pie by taxing at their maximum levy.
What you're saying is raise the guy's paying $100,000. He's only going to pay $1,500.
$1,500 in 2009, yes.
Set the tax rate a lot higher than that, so the guys that only have $80,000 are paying more than what, a higher percent actually than what the $100,000 is.
Well, I would say, you really haven't got control of what your tax rates are. You've got control over your tax levy. So if somebody's at their circuit breaker limit and tax rates continue to rise, it doesn't affect that taxpayer at all because they're already at their limit, right? So in a sense they do. In a sense they do. That is a good point. Yeah, that is right. Okay, so that's the circuit breaker credits, and you can see the levy less credits there. Dollar change in total, almost $10 million below what it had been in 2008. So that's the key thing that I think that all the counties are going to want to try to calculate in advance if they can, and if they can't, then somehow allow for it in their budget. One thing to notice is that if you took a look at this, and I have looked at this, if you took a look at this on a taxing district basis, not on a unit basis, you'd see that almost all of the circuit breaker losses are in the two townships that include Connersville, the city of Connersville. And the reason is that's where the rates are highest. And this is going to be true across the whole state, that it's mainly units that share assessed value with cities that are going to see circuit breaker losses because a city adds another layer of tax rate to people's tax bills. And so if you've got a school corporation that shares taxpayers with a city, you're likely to have losses. If you've got a county, obviously the counties share their tax base with all the cities, they're likely to have losses. Townships that don't share any tax base with a city don't have any circuit breaker losses, don't have any substantial circuit breaker losses, certainly. So if you looked at it on a taxing district basis, you'd see that the circuit breaker losses are concentrated where the tax rates are highest. Let's see, turn the page and see what else we've got here. What happens to the tax rates? Decline altogether, but that's entirely due to the decline of, or the elimination of the levies in Fayette County, the welfare levies and the school general fund levy in the school corporation, and the state levy as well. All the other unit rates go up, and that's a result of two things. One is the loss of Vistion, but this is going to happen everywhere in the state. City rates are going to be going up everywhere because of the reduction in homestead assessed value. That great big increase in homestead deductions is going to reduce assessed values everywhere. Counties and school corporations are going to have lower levies because of the state takeovers. The cities have a very small state takeover in those pensions, and so cities are going to see their tax rates go up. So be ready when people start looking at city tax rates and say, oh, your tax rates are going up, what are you doing with all that extra money? Well, there is no extra money. It's just a change in assessed value and deductions that the legislature has put into 1001. So that's going to happen everywhere. And I'm sure the City and Town Association will be on top of that and letting people know that it is not the case that the county and the school were being frugal and the cities were not. This is just a result of 1001 and how it worked out. Now, 2009, you can see changes in tax bills by property type. A little bit misleading. You got the negative 11% on industrial there. That's entirely because Vistion is gone, and so you got a big industrial property that is not paying property taxes anymore. All the other remaining industrial property is paying more. but Vistion and the personal property as well have big numbers, negatives. You got a big positive number for homesteads, and that comes from two places. One is the Vistion elimination, raising taxes, raising tax rates. But the other is, and there are maybe a third to a half of the counties are in this boat. I call this the echo effect. And what's happening is that we're delivering property tax relief one way in 2008 with additional credits, and we're delivering property tax relief a different way in 2009 with deductions and levy takeovers. Statewide, the amount of property tax relief delivered to homeowners is about the same, but that's not true county by county. Some counties do better with credits, and other counties do better with deductions and levy takeovers. Places that, say, had a very large share of their total tax bill in the county that was school general fund would see a great big reduction in their levies in 2009, and it might even be a reduction from what it was in 2008. On the other hand, a place, and I think Fayette falls into this category, where the school general fund is not such a large share of the total, and that would be because you've got a significant city in Connersville here in the county. That means that the tax relief formula for 2009 doesn't treat Fayette quite as well as the additional credits do in 2008. And so what you see is homeowners seeing a tax increase from 2008 to 2009. Even apart from Vistion, this would likely have happened. One thing that you really, really want to point out, because it's absolutely true, is that the 2009 bill is still 1/3 less than it was in 2007. So there is tax relief having been delivered to homeowners. It's just not as generous as it was in 2008. So that would be one reason for distributing the state homestead relief from 2008 to 09 and 10 to smooth out that increase. But in any case, you're going to get increases, double-digit increases in homeowner taxes in those three, in 9, 10, and then out into 11 if you do that. But likely to be a big increase. So you're going to have homeowners extremely happy in 2008, and then what will they do? How will they feel in 2000? Yes, I know. How will they feel in 2009? You can see the expressions on your faces. You know, well, you know what they're going to say. You're going to say, you gave me all this tax relief, now you're taking it all back. Well, you're not taking it all back, right? You're only taking half of it back. Right? And a lot of that is due to Vistion, right? So you know, you got to say, hopefully your homestead owners, your homeowners will be generous and say, we're comparing it back to 2007, not to 2008. But fair warning, that seems to be what's likely to happen here in Fayette. And you won't be alone. There are a number of counties for which this is true as well.
That by spreading the credit will help too.
Mm-hmm.
If an auditor and the council spread that credit over 3 years, it won't be such a burden.
If you're allowed to do that, the analysis I got at the end, instead of 120% increase, it would be about 15, but it'd be 15 for 3 straight years instead of 120 and then 5 and 4. So, well, that's a political decision. You know, in ordinary times, 3 straight years of 15% increases in homestead tax payments, people would be up in arms, right? They'd be tossing tea bags into rivers and things like that, right? In these times, maybe not, right? So you got to know whether you can, you got a problem in a sense. If you give them 15% increases 3 straight years, and then you say, you would have seen a doubling of your taxes in 2009 had we not done this, but that's comparing something that exists to something that would have happened but didn't. And I know from experience that's very hard to explain to people. But on the other hand, is that harder to explain than it is hard to explain that, yes, your taxes are higher here in 2009 than they were in 2008, but they're still lower than they were in 2007.
And it's really going to be really evident to the taxpayer because this is the first year we have to send out those tax comparison bills. So we're going to have a reduction and then send out in 2009, and it's going to show, 2008
Yeah,
60%
yeah.
reduction, and then 2009 it could show a 70 or 80% increase.
Yeah. I wonder whether the legislature couldn't be prevailed upon to give you the option of doing a 3-year, 07, 08, 09, because there are going to be so many counties in this boat, and the legislature's going to take the hit too. They're going to, people are going to be saying, you gave us all that tax relief, where did it go? I wonder whether you couldn't do a 3-year listing on that, and it would show people that their taxes are lower now than they were. Yeah. Yeah.
Stop in my office after we send bills out next year.
Do you get sheriff's protection? Yeah.
But isn't there also a shift from, the way I see it, from personal property to real property because of the Vistion? It looks like, we're raising 9 million, then
Yeah.
5 million, then all of a sudden it's 13 and 1.8.
Right,
That's a
right.
tremendous shift in its own right.
That's right, and that is the other thing that's happening here, besides the change in the way tax relief is delivered, is that you had this big taxpayer that's now gone, and you're spreading some of that, more than $1 million of that tax that Vistion used to pay, over your remaining taxpayers. And those taxpayers that actually live in the jurisdictions where Vistion was take the biggest hit, which is why non-homestead residential and apartments are going up more than farmland and commercial, because especially the commercial apartments are just, I mean, they're all, as far as I can tell, all of them are in Connersville. So that's what's going on right there. So that's the outlook. That's the difficult year without any doubt at all, 2009. So many different things going on, and even more so here in Fayette. Well, what happens in 2010? The only significant additional thing that happens in 2010 is a further tightening in the circuit breaker credits. So as you can see with assessed value, I've got an increase in the farmland from 1,200 to 1,250, relatively small increase, only about 4%, 2% assumption for everybody else, and that gives 2.9%, but very little variation across the different units on Table 1 for 2010. If you turn the page, though, what you see is the big impact of the further tightening of circuit breaker credits, down from 1.5% to 1% for homesteads, from 2.5% to 2% for other residential, commercial apartments, farmland, and then 3.5% to 3% for all the other property. I've got circuit breaker credits here going up to $3,250,000. I had it at $3,600,000 before I discovered that error I had. The error made the limits on circuit breakers even tighter than they should have been. Nonetheless, a significant hit, obviously, on your budgets. And once again, it's Connersville and those units that share tax base with Connersville that see the biggest reductions. And once again, this means that, yes, you'll have a property tax levy of $21.5 million assumed here, but $3.2 million of that you just won't collect, just won't show up because taxpayers won't have to pay it. And that makes for almost a 5% reduction in total property tax revenues available to local governments from 2009 to 2010. If we go to the last two tables for 2010, not a whole lot happening to the tax rates, going up mainly because of the assumption of 4% increase in levies versus 2% increase in assessed values. And then for the changes in the tax bills, you're seeing a whole lot of folks getting reductions, everybody in fact except homesteads and agriculture. Everybody else is getting those reductions because of the tightening of the circuit breaker limits. And statewide, in fact, it is the rental housing that is getting more of the circuit breaker credits than any other kind of property. It's the landlords that are benefiting more from circuit breakers than anybody. And part of that is that they've got that tighter 2% limit, and the other part is that they haven't gotten the kinds of tax relief that homeowners have received. Homeowners, even though they have the tightest 1% limit, don't get much in circuit breaker credits because their tax bills are knocked down by all of those deductions. For the typical homeowner, in fact, less than half of their assessed value is actually going to be taxable. That brings down their tax bills. That makes their tax bills a small percentage of their initial gross assessed value, which means that few of them tend to be eligible for the circuit breaker credits. So mostly it's rental housing and commercial property that is benefiting from the circuit breaker credits. Homeowners get an increase that year because the state is going to reduce the amount of homestead credits there from 487,000 to 278,000, and that will cause a little bit of an increase in homeowner assessed value. And since they don't benefit much from the circuit breakers, you don't have that effect in there. And then agriculture getting another increase because of the rise in farmland values. So That's what's going on. Now let me talk a little bit about local option income tax and the choices that you have to make there. That's on page 10, and there's two tables, table 5 and table 6. And what I did is to simulate what your local option income tax relief payments to each kind of property would look like and what kind of circuit breaker credits would you have under each of these different ways of distributing revenue. And there's 4 different ways of doing it. You can have no local option income tax at all. You could distribute the relief to homeowners or homesteads only. You can give it to homesteads and rental housing, as you did, or you could give the tax relief to all property. And if you take a look at the totals down there, you can see what the options are. Had you not enacted a local option income tax altogether, you can see that the estimate on the circuit breaker credits is $5,542,993 compared to the estimate for 2010, which I think is which is the estimate it came up with of $3.25 million. So, as you can see in Table 6, an additional $2.3 million in circuit breaker credit losses had you not instituted the local option income tax. Now, if you think about it, I used $3,511,000 as the revenue from a 1% LOIT based on the local income taxes that you've already got. I didn't increase it. Now, I could have increased it. You know, ordinarily you'd think this thing would increase year after year. But my thinking there was that, A, we might have a national recession, and B, the loss of Vistion is not likely to do your local economies any good. So I didn't want to speculate on any declines in this thing, but so I just left it the same. Be easy to feed in different numbers there and see what the results are. But if you think about it, what this means is that adopting the local option income tax reduced your circuit breaker losses by $2.3 million, which means that only about $1.2 million of this 3.5 is going for actual tax relief. The rest of it is actually generating revenue for you. And the reason that happens is because when you put this local option income tax credit on the tax bills, the first thing it does is reduce the circuit breaker credit, and then it provides additional property tax relief. So by reducing the circuit breaker credit, it means you collect more of your property tax levy, which means you get more revenue. So this is true even though you know, the local option income tax won't appear as a line in your budgets. Adopting the thing by reducing circuit breaker credits is actually generating additional revenue for you. So the question is, how much does it reduce circuit breaker credits? How much additional revenue from the various options there? Had you given the tax relief to homesteads only, my estimate for 2010 on the circuit breaker credits would have been $4,590,000 or $1.3 million more than what you've got. In other words, had you given it just to homeowners, it would have cost you $1.3 million in additional revenue. So that would have been an extremely costly thing to do had it gone just to homesteads. The choice between relief to homesteads and rentals versus relief to all property, that's pretty even, actually. It turns out that the choice you made was the choice that reduced the circuit breaker credits the most. But had you distributed it to all property, the difference would have been only about, I think, $38,000 altogether. So, you know, one or the other depends on who gets the property tax relief. Of course, if you can see the difference in the LOIT relief on the relief to all property there, the one that has negative $609,000 for homesteads, you can see how that would redistribute the property tax relief. And agriculture gets that $366,000 in additional tax relief at the cost of less for homesteads, non-homestead residential, and commercial apartments. It gets distributed to everybody that way. And the circuit breaker credits go up by just a little bit. Now, if you look at what the circuit breaker credits are in the no local option income tax situation there, I'd forgotten that I had these numbers right here. You can see what kinds of property are actually getting the circuit breaker credits before we actually subtract off the local option income tax. And as you can see, non-homestead residential gets more than $2 million of the total $5.5 million, so something between 35 and 40% of the circuit breaker credits go to non-homestead residential, and another $500,000 go to commercial apartments. Less than $1 million of that 5.5 actually goes to homesteads, so less than 20% of it going to homesteads. So homesteads not the chief beneficiaries of the circuit breakers. It's rental housing and commercial property that is benefiting the most from the circuit breaker credits. And that means that if you take your circuit breaker credits and give it just to homeowners, the most you could save in circuit breakers credits is $955,000, because that's all that your homeowners are getting. But if you give it to non-homestead residential or non-homestead residential and commercial, that's where the savings on circuit breaker credits come. So that's why that works out that way. And you made the right choice last year. No doubt not for this reason, because how could you have known? But it turns out you made the right choice, but choosing to give it all property wouldn't have made that much difference in total. And I think we've covered everything that's in this report now. And so let's just throw it open to questions. Yeah, Mayor.
With our losses, don't worry about how we're going to fund services.
Mm-hmm.
And right here in front of all my friends and God and everybody, I have to prove that you reduce the law to 0.75 and add the 0.25, that will be the same to the taxpayer in order to help us get to public safety, which is really hurting us.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my people here
Mm-hmm.
listening.
Mm-hmm.
What would that do? Will that hurt? And then I know my friends have advocated, let's spread it across everybody this time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just, without a calculator, tell me, are we heading in the right direction, or is that going to cause us to waste our circuit breaker?
Well, let's see. If you reduce the property tax relief, local option income tax, which you've got, from 1% to 0.75%, that will increase circuit breaker losses. But if you add in the 0.25% for public safety, that will be pure revenue. So I think it's a net revenue gain, but not the full 0.25% revenue gain. Does that make sense? Okay, so I think that's
0.25% has to be spread only between the county and the city.
county and the city. That's right. That's right. Although, geez, it's for firefighting too. To the township volunteers, I'm not sure whether they get any of it. Yeah, I'm not sure either. Come to think of it, but yeah, it's public safety, police, sheriff, fire protection, ambulance, and so I guess anybody who provides those things could get some of it. Yeah, yeah. You know, one of the things the 1001 did was to loosen up the requirements on the local option income taxes. Last year, you had to adopt both the levy freeze and the property tax relief income tax in order to do the public safety. Now you only have to adopt one of them, which you have, so you could go to the public safety rate at a full 0.25% right away if you wanted to. That's right. That's the other thing 1001 did, was extend the deadline to the end of December. I think a very good idea, given the struggles that counties are going to have just analyzing the situation. And so it may be that they find in September that the circuit breaker losses are going to be so great that they're going to need something else to happen. They'll still have time to adopt the local option income taxes. So you will have time.
In the past, for the schools, when we're in a declining assessed valuation, the state helped make up part of our income, if I remember right.
Yes, yes.
Is that still going to be the case this year?
It is. I should have mentioned that. That is a good point. That, in fact, that's not in the model. That should have been in the model. I'll put that in the model next round. The state looked at the school corporations. You know, they're a little afraid of school corporations because school corporations are in the Constitution, or at least providing schools are in the Constitution. So when you mess with school corporation budgets, they pay extra attention, and they allocated additional revenues in 2009 and 2010 so that if your school corporation loses more than 2% of its levy to circuit breakers, they will pay you up to that amount, and it just depends on how far the money goes. And the thinking, if I remember right, is they may replace all of the losses in 2009, but they won't have enough to replace it in 2010. So there is some extra money for schools that will replace some of the circuit breaker losses in 2009. Now, if I take a look here, did I do that? Let's see, circuit breaker losses, school corporation, 341. It looks like you're just over 2%, and this is the funny thing about it. That's an firm threshold so that if you're at 1.99, you get nothing. If you're at 2%, you get all of it. So it really pays to have your circuit breaker credits a little bit higher than 2%, at least in 2009. And if this really turns out to be true, 341,000 or almost 342 out of 6735, if I'm doing my arithmetic right, that is just over 2%. And so you should end up getting 300,000, maybe something like that, from the state, if that's how the arithmetic ends up working. Yeah.
That sort of the state coming back and sort of filling in the void for the school corporation. Do you feel that in 09 or 10?
Both, actually. They've allocated some money for 2009 and 2010 to do that.
Is it different proportions? In which year would you feel it more?
In 2010, you'll feel the circuit breaker losses more in 2010, just because the circuit breaker losses are going to be so much bigger in 2010 with the tightening of the limits that there's surely not going to be enough money appropriated by the state to fill in the whole amount. Whereas in 2009, they're still working it out in the State House. Last I heard, they may actually have appropriated enough to cover the entire loss for school corporations, and in the initial estimates had them close to it as well. So that's likely to happen. What they're going to do after that is anybody's guess. There's a lawsuit already out. It is a lawsuit that was actually filed before 1001 passed. But there are some real equity problems with the circuit breaker and schools that might catch the court's attention. So if you think about it, it is school corporations that share their tax base with cities that take the biggest circuit breaker losses, because cities have that extra layer of tax on there. So it is the city school corporations that are going to lose more than the rural and suburban school corporations are going to lose. The city school corporations are where most poor people live, so you're going to be cutting the budgets of the school corporations with the poor people and not the school corporations with the not so poor people, and there may be a court challenge on the equity of that. The state may recognize that right away and say, we got to do something in the school formula to fix that, or maybe we make some additional appropriation. Maybe we continue with this additional appropriation for school corporations. We've got no clue as to what the school funding formula is going to look like next year, since it'll be the first one ever written without property taxes in it. So who knows what it's going to look like.
We have a fairly sizable rainy day fund. Have they talked about touching those in any way?
Boy, that's getting a little more technical than I would care to go. There's been some fear that taking over the school general fund means they take some of the rainy day fund that you accumulated as part of that. That may happen, it may not, I'm not sure. But yeah, it is something to pay attention to at any rate.
Is that in the bill?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised you'd have to do a closer reading than I did. Here's the bill right here, by the way. So if you want to take a look, it's 804 pages. But I'm not up enough on the really close details of it to tell you whether that's true or not. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah, I think that, and that's one of the unfortunate parts of amending the Constitution to put these things in there, is that the amendment process, which has been started now, would end up in 2010 with a vote in November, and we won't know very much about how this process works by then, because 2010 will be the first year of the really tight circuit breakers. So it'll be, we'll see how the amendment process goes. Yes. Yeah, they would. If there were significant changes in the TIFs, that would change it. So, but yeah, I took what existed in 2007 and projected it forward. And that's a good point too, as well. You know, a lot of people, depending on the Legislative Services Agency estimates of what circuit breaker credits are, those are the best estimates available. You know, the Department of Local Government Finance twists your arms to get you to send them the data, and that data goes over to Legislative Services, and so they made those estimates based on data on 3 million property parcels out there in the state. But it was based on trend projections of levies and trend projections of assessed values. They couldn't know whether you're doing a bond issue, whether you've got some big change in your assessed value. They couldn't know that. So LSA's estimates are going to be accurate if what's happening in the next couple of years is consistent with what's happened in the last few years, if the trend is being followed. Here in Fayette, the trend is not being followed. LSA said your circuit breaker losses in 2010 would be about 500,000. These estimates say it's going to be more than 3 million. That's because of the Visteon situation. So, you know, projections that anybody outside of your county is making can't be as good as the projections you could make because you know so much more in detail about what's going on here. So if there's something going on with a TIF, no, that's not been incorporated here.
Larry, while we got you,
Yeah.
Richard just whispered in my ear, he's not supposed to be doing that. What if, I'll be like Dr. Weber, let's pretend, what if we left the 1% and added the 0.25? What would that do?
That should leave the circuit breaker losses the same as they are now, and then adds the additional revenue. So that would be a pure net gain in revenue for public services. Yeah.
Even more dramatic than that, what if we enacted the 1% levy reduction? How would that affect the circuit breaker?
Yeah. Then.
If you went to the,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a big advocate of raising property or raising taxes, but what if we went to the full 2% on our levy, our property tax reduction and our levy reduction?
Well, with that first levy freeze one, you can't just enact a 1%. That's the upper limit on the thing. DLGF in a couple of weeks here ought to be telling you what rate you would have to enact to cover the increase in the levy. Oh, you were the one. That's right.
We were over the one, we could do the whole
That's
thing.
right. That's right. But didn't that have something to do with welfare though?
Who is that?
Yeah. So that's gone now. So
5-year average was 1.8,
yeah, I remember that.
but I'm not so sure we're still there. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I thought that had something to do with some quirky thing that was happening to your welfare levy. The only county, I remember that now. That's right. You were the only one that was up at the, you know, everybody else is at 0.2 and 0.3, and you're at the full 1% in the very first year. I suspect that will be smaller next when it comes out this time. But in any case, if you do adopt that, what that would do would be to freeze the levy increase. So where I've assumed 4% increases, it would be 0 for everybody except for the schools and not counting the debt service and capital projects. So it would reduce the levy growth from averaging 4 across the county to averaging maybe 1.5. And that would reduce circuit breaker losses. If you kept doing that, I would guess you'd cut a couple 300,000 off your circuit breaker losses. So it's funny, you know, so that would be a net revenue gain, moving to income taxes from property taxes. So any move away from property to income taxes adds to your revenue because it reduces circuit breaker losses. So that would be right. But the 0.25 is direct additional revenue. The 2/10 or 3/10 or 5/10 or 1% or whatever it would be for the levy freeze, part of that would be additional tax relief. Part of it would be circuit breaker savings. Yeah.
How does General 1 affect what TIF districts look like? There were some changes.
There were, you know, I haven't looked closely enough at that to know. But yeah, there is a long section on tax increment financing in there, and a lot of it is trying to make it more transparent, limiting the turnover that you can do, reenacting a TIF after one expires, limiting the length of time, that kind of thing. The legislature was basically unhappy with some of the finagling that the bond attorneys have thought up, I guess, about how you work with TIFs, and they've tried to tighten it up. And it's mostly tightening things up.
I want to thank you. You've been here 2 times. You haven't cost us a penny. And we appreciate you, and we do appreciate you. Would you all give him a hand?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Reiterate that, and we need to set up our meeting for the next, we're gonna skip July, and we're gonna meet August the 28th, which would be after the budgets are done. We can talk about that. All of you are welcome. You can kind of see what we've been going through, not this intense or detailed, but this is a lot of thinking. This is hard work that we've all been trying to go through to get to a point where we can ultimately make the correct decision for the county. And I appreciate what you've done and your efforts towards helping us, because it's ever-changing and very hard to get your hands around.
Well, let me also say I appreciate the opportunity to work with you and work with the data. I'm going to be making a statewide broadcast through the Extension Service on Thursday, and my claim to expertise is in large part having done this exercise, so I do appreciate the opportunity.
So we'll be meeting the 28th of August again, our government, and that's at the city.
8:30 at City Hall.
Once again, thank you all for being here. Thank everyone for watching. It's a little part of what we try to do.
Right.